And now, in my Saturday Superlative series, I'm going to talk about my running backs. And sort of a special note, when Arizona State was romping against Arizona to get the territorial Cup, in what normally we call garbage time, a very important historical thing happened. And as far as we know, Jackson He, when he scored his touchdown, and in fact, just by touching a football in an FBS game, as far as we can find, he's the first mainland Chinese born person to play an FBS game and, of course, obviously score an FBS game. He only had 4 carries for 7 yards, but he had a very tough touchdown where he had to run through a tackler. And I don't know what he runs, but he's a solidly built guy. Like, I could see that he hasn't been wasting his time in the weight room, and he just ran through a tackler. I mean, good tackle. It wasn't like it was a bad tackle. Good solid form wrap up tackle. He just kept driving his legs and pushed himself and the tackler into the end zone. And then he knocked off what he called the Chinese gritty. So the kid has a fantastic personality, and I'm hoping that this signals that 21% of the Earth's population will now begin to play America's game. And speaking of America's game, if I could talk to the Doak Walker people, I would say, look, there's a lot of great running backs in this country, but the person who deserves the Doak Walker Award this year is Jarrett Patterson. Now, he ended up 123 yards short of Barry Sanders' 3-game record for rushing yards, but that's only because he didn't play in the second half. His coach doesn't seem to care, Coach Lance Leipold, doesn't seem to care too much about records, but he had 105 yards and 16 carries all in the first half, 2 touchdowns, and their eyes are on the prize of winning the MAC, and if they do that, I'm sure that'll make up for anything else, and hopefully he'll get a chance to really go off in the MAC championship game. But speaking of going off, though, Tar Heel born and a Tar Heel bred. When I die, I'll be a Tar Heel dead. I used to live as a very young person. In fact, the first football I ever saw in my life was while I was living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, just off Franklin Avenue, and I remember the first football game I ever saw. I was a very small child, but it sort of stuck with me. It was a big game. It was a rivalry game, UNC versus NC State, and Don McCauley went off. But to this game, speaking of going off, Michael Carter, 24 carries, 300, not 200, not 100, 308 yards, 2 TDs, which, is the headline, but right beneath the headline is Javonte Williams, who had 23 carries for 236 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their combined 544 yards is an FBS record between 2 running backs, and they'd still be running now if the game. I mean, the only thing that stopped them was, eventually, Carolina took their foot off the gas pedal. But I predicted when Mac Brown took the job, sort of like when I predicted when Herman Edwards took the job, give him 3 years. Watch out for Carolina next year. I'm not saying they'll win the ACC. I'm saying that they will be close. They will not be a top 5 or top 3 program in the ACC. They'll be a top 2 program in the ACC. That's my prediction. Speaking of top programs, hey, come on, voters, bump up Coastal Carolina. CJ Marable. Speaking of guys who should be contenders, at least, for the Doak Walker. 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, also had a couple of receiving touchdowns. CJ Marable is an NFL running back. He might be a third down back at the next level. Who knows? But I think of sort of similar types of backs like Joe Cribbs, guys who weren't all that big but ran big and managed to have big. James Brooks, for those who are super old like I am. He's like a slightly larger version of James Brooks, who, of course, played with Bo Jackson at Auburn and later had a really good career with both the Chargers and the Bengals. I see some of that in him. Let's see. Iowa's Goodson had he had 106 yards, 11 carries, 1 touchdown, and he's a good one. He's rounding into form. Oklahoma State's sort of back up running backs are still really good. Richardson went off for 23 carries, 169 yards, 3 touchdowns. So some people, a lot of things have been said about the year that Chubba Hubbard's had. Part of it was, I think, he was battling nagging injuries. I don't know if things ever got fully right between he and the head coach, though of course he said everything was fine. Either way, he's going to be a fine running back at the next level, but his eventually saying to shut it down for this season has opened up opportunities for a couple of really good running backs. We talked about, the other backup last week. Both of Oklahoma State's backup running backs, are really good. Minnesota. Okay, well, almost by law, I usually talk about Muhammad Ibrahim. 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, and, sort of boring once again. I mean, he's not a scintillating running back, but he's very productive. He's very tough. And he's a classic between the tackles, 4.5 yards a carry kind of running back. There's a place for that. Georgia has a ludicrous number of running backs. It could have been James Cook. Could have been. It's everybody. Everybody gets a chance at some point. This time it's Edwards' chance. 11 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. I hope at some point they do sort of figure out who gets to be the man, and then the other guys get to be the man next to the man next to the man. It's hard to establish a rhythm if you're only getting 10, 11, 12, 13 carries. Well, we'll see what happens with Georgia and their running back future. Zamir White also is. I mean, I know they've got this embarrassment of riches. They're trying to figure it out, but figure it out. I know I talked about one Buffalo running back. The guy who actually got the lion's share of the carries is Kevin Marks Jr., who is from Norfolk, Virginia, 757. But 15 carries, 182 yards, 2 touchdowns, and once again, he could have gone off for more. They could have had 2 running. I mean, maybe not quite to the Carolina level, but 2 guys go over 200 if they wanted to, but they didn't. Oh, here's a guy I've noticed once earlier in the season, and he's impressed me more now. Is Ty Jordan, Utah. Once again, just a freshman. So many young running backs. 17 carries, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he's, once again, a tough guy, but with a little bit of wiggle, a little bit of speed to go with it, too. Northwestern, speaking of running back duos, Isaiah Hull and Cam Porter both went off. Porter, 24 carries, 142 yards, 2 touchdowns, tough guy. Has a little bit of wiggle, but not really looking to make you miss unless you take a bad angle, but he'll give it to you either way. He can run over you, around you, through you. And then Isaiah Hull, 13 carries, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns. Sort of like a Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside kind of thing, but both guys looked really good, and Northwestern just pounded the rock and are now off to play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. So, those are my running back Saturday superlatives.